it's impossible that I have lung cancer.
The word cancer frightens many people.
The first oncologist told me I would live 3 to 6 months.
We basically put her on hospice care.
Within 3 weeks, I'd lost a third of my weight. I weighed 72 pounds.
It didn't even look like she'd live a couple weeks.
Death looked better than taking a second dose of chemo.
Her primary care physician suggested that we try a macrobiotic diet.
How could something so simple solve something so complicated?
Welcome to The Incurables. I'm Don Wildman. Janet Sommer was no stranger to disease. As a teenager, she was at her mother's bedside when she lost a grueling battle with lung cancer. As a career nurse, Janet had cared for patients fighting every type of illness, so she was very careful to take care of her own body. Janet was active, she ate well, and she never smoked as her mother had done. Caring for her 2 boys while working full-time at the hospital kept her plenty busy. Janet was so engaged with day-to-day responsibilities that it likely took her longer than normal to notice what felt like an annoying pressure in her chest. By the time she had one of her colleagues take a serious look, the damage had long been done.
My mom was a smoker. In fact, I think women at that period of time in the 50s smoked to keep their weight down. Even after her diagnosis, her physician recommended that she not stop smoking, that it would be too stressful for her.
When my mother was dying of cancer, my sister Janet, she was the one who went to the hospital every day and took care of her.
I know when my mom was sick, how she looked, how from the chemo she had lost her hair, how emaciated she was, how she gasped for every breath. I always said as a nurse I would never do chemo, never. But when it was my turn, when I was faced with death, I jumped at it. I thought I have to do something. I can't just sit here and die. Very quickly, my breathing turned the same way, and from the chemo I had lost my hair, and I was extremely thin. So I could see that I was following in her footsteps, absolutely, that I would die that same agonizing death she died.
Janet lost her mother when she was just 19 years old, and the trauma of that experience convinced her to go into nursing. It also brought her siblings closer together.
As little kids, my sister and I were very close.
But very different. I was much more outgoing. I was the cheerleader. I was the prom queen. Janet was always kind of behind the scenes, a little bit more like motherly.
When we went to college, we went to separate places. We did our own thing.
We stayed close and we stayed in touch, but as usual, as you're growing up, your interests change.
But as we married, then we became close again.
Janet and her husband Robert had 2 sons, Ryan and Scott. The boys always knew they could count on Mom.
She was always really close to my brother and I. You could tell that she definitely, loved us a lot.
She was young, but she even acted younger than she was. She was always right there with us every step of the way.
She was always very healthy. She took care of herself. She was very active. She was involved in aerobics, and she was involved in playing tennis. We were active as a family. We went boating and water skied.
Janet and Robert began to grow apart and eventually divorced. They agreed it was important for both to remain involved in their sons' lives.
Obviously a divorce is a difficult situation for kids, but they always remain close just for us, and they've always lived close.
Even though we're divorced, we are good friends. We're obviously relatively close neighbors. The family dynamics, in this case, they work.
Once I was divorced, I was working full-time, so a lot of my time was spent away from the home. It was very stressful in that, and I had little time to go to the boys' activities anymore.
Janet was able to adjust mentally to the long hours, but physically, the stress was quietly taking its toll.
I was 45 years old, working as a nurse in the hospital, and I noticed that I had some heaviness in my chest. Not a big deal, but just some heaviness along my sternum. It really felt like someone had 2 fists pushing against my sternum as firmly as they could. My first thought was bronchitis. And I had one of the doctors listen at work to my lungs. I said, maybe I have pneumonia or something. She said, no, your lungs are clear.
I don't remember her actually sharing the discomfort part. I remember her saying she didn't feel that well, but I think you probably have that conversation with your friends or your family, and you don't really think anything of it.
And the next day I would have another physician listen, because it truly was such pressure just along the sternum, the center of my chest. I called a friend of mine who I played tennis with, a physician, and I said, could he give me an antibiotic? And he said, sure, he'd give me an antibiotic, but he wanted me to get a chest x-ray to make sure that there was nothing else going on. Then I went to work on Monday. We did the chest x-ray, and the radiologist called me and said, let's do another one. And I teased them about not being able to even do one chest x-ray right, thinking that I was absolutely fine. And they repeated the chest x-ray.
We looked at the x-ray. The examination wasn't that critical. I got some blood work. I had her get a CAT scan of the chest, and then we reviewed the CAT scan.
That afternoon we scanned me to find 3 tumors actually in the left lung, 7 in the right, 3 in my liver, 1 in my pancreas, a mass in my abdomen.
And she came immediately to me, her friend, and shared with me the shock of what she had been told. And of course we were both in disbelief, and immediately you believe it can't be so, and tests will prove otherwise.
The first oncologist told me I would live 3 to 6 months, and I thought, I can't be that sick. I'm not that sick. I'm a healthy person. I'm not a smoker, as my mom was a smoker. I certainly trusted him, but I was going to get a second opinion. And he said, yes, you should. You should definitely get a second opinion. And I can remember when I went for the second opinion, and I said, how long do you think I have? And he said, probably 3 to 6 weeks. 3 to 6 weeks. That's when I started thinking, I can't clean up my house in 3 to 6 weeks. How could I end my life in 3 to 6 weeks?
Janet Sommer was living a happy, healthy life. Then, in her mid-40s, doctors told her she was riddled with cancerous tumors and she'd be dead within a month.
I said to my sister, I'm only going to live a couple more weeks. And she was great. She said, no, he's wrong. And she hugged me, and it was great. I needed someone to be positive then. And she just kept her arms around me there in the lobby till the car came, and then we walked outside.
You don't know really what to do for a person at that point. You don't know if you can hug them and tell them it'll be okay. And I'm sure I tried to tell her it's probably not real, it's probably wrong, but we've all been touched by cancer, so you just try and hold on and comfort the person who's been given that terrible news.
I told my dad that I had lung cancer, and I hated to tell him because he had watched my mom, of course, die of lung cancer.
The word cancer is a word that frightens many people, and obviously it was frightening to me, and immediately I thought, what is the impact it's going to have on all of us?
I decided to go back to the first oncologist because at least he was giving me 3 to 6 months. 10 days later, we did abdominal surgery. We removed an abdominal mass. Fortunately for me, this mass was attached to the retroperitoneal wall, which is the back wall of the abdominal cavity. So I didn't have to lose any part of my intestines or a piece of my liver or anything like that. They could remove this mass and still leave me whole.
Janet and Robert decided not to tell the boys about her illness until she had all the facts of her case. They waited until after her abdominal surgery to deliver the bad news.
I remember being at school and, her saying we need to talk. Anytime somebody says we need to talk, that you don't really want to talk because you got to bring up more serious matters.
Ryan was home from school. Scott, because he was in high school, was in the area. And my ex-husband and my 2 sons came over, and we sat here in my living room.
This was a whole new experience for Janet and myself, reacting to their reaction.
My older son, I can remember tears going down his cheeks, where Scott, nothing, just looking down.
At that young age, it was easier just to kind of ignore it, almost in a way. It was kind of like, well, if I don't really focus on it, then it probably isn't as real.
Their reactions were of great sadness and anger, and again, somewhat confusion because, they had not been exposed to cancer. They only had their mother and father basically describing what had happened and what was likely to happen.
I did believe that the boys would be fine. I trust their dad. I knew he was a good dad and that they would be fine with them. I was sad for myself. I was sad that I would not see them grow up. I would not see the partner they chose for their life. I would not be a grandma. Those were things that made me extremely sad.
I couldn't stand for her to die. My sister and my brother are my family, and I decided that I would do absolutely anything anyone asked me to help my sister live.
Janet felt she had no other choice but to try chemotherapy. The protocol called for 6 doses.
Pretty much from that point on, Jan went downhill at a very rapid rate. She quickly lost weight. She got sick, she got gray. It didn't even look like she'd live a couple weeks.
I vomited day and night. I would have a sip of water and that would induce 45 minutes of throwing up. Within 3 weeks, I'd lost 1/3 of my weight. I weighed 72 pounds.
We had brought her in the hospital several times because of symptom control, just unable to breathe. I think we drained lots of fluid from her lung. And so, we basically put her on hospice care.
The oncologist came to see me in the hospital and he said, we can start the second treatment while you're right here. And I said, well, let me think about it. And my internist came in, Dr. Grossman, and he said, probably don't do the second treatment. He said, it is so harsh and you are so fragile right now that second dose might kill you before the cancer would kill you.
But in the back of my mind, I thought, well, there must be something else that we could certainly offer her, at least in the short term.
And I said, well, what would I do? I can't just give up. And he said, had I ever considered alternative medicine?
25 years earlier, Janet Sommer had been forced to watch as cancer took her mother's life. Now, the disease had come for her. Janet allowed doctors to administer chemotherapy, but the experience had proven ineffective and too dangerous to continue. The choice now was either give up and die or look for some other way.
When Dr. Grossman recommended possibly doing some alternative, I said I really thought that was for hippies. Being a nurse myself, I didn't consider it part of what I would do if I were sick.
Dennis suggested that we try a macrobiotic diet.
At this point, she was so ill that she wasn't eating. The macrobiotics was a way of increasing the body's immune system and at least get some nutrition from.
I thought, yes, I have to try something because I was not going to die like my mom died. I was not going to die like many people die of actually chemotoxicity, more so than the cancer. I wanted to die with dignity.
When he suggested this macrobiotic diet, I jumped on it immediately. I went and looked in the phone book for the Macrobiotic Center of Cleveland. I started hunting down different teachers.
We looked up macrobiotics and we sort of winged it. I stopped a lot of the foods that I traditionally ate and we started making miso soup. And so I was eating very, very tiny bits. In fact, what I ate within 24 hours would probably fit a teacup.
Nancy's quest to learn more about the diet led her to macrobiotic counselor Francois Roland.
When I saw Janet, they already had begun to learn about macrobiotics, but they wanted to make sure it was the right way to do it.
When I saw Francois walk into the room, here was this tall, slender man, and I thought, I don't want to be that thin. Here I was dying, gasping for breath, sitting on the couch, and I'm judging a tall, thin man. That was my first initial judgment, how much I judged people, how different my heart is today than it was then. And he came in and gave a consultation.
Even though she was tired, weak, she still had a lot of vital energy in her. And she realized that actually the chemotherapy was harming her more than her real condition. She had a lot of health in her body that needed to be reawakened.
A week later, Francois came back and did a cooking class. 8 of my friends and Dr. Grossman came to this cooking class.
Healing through food was new to me, as it was to her, and we just had to believe that that could occur, and we did.
My philosophy was that, if you were in such a desperate strait and somebody offered you something that could at least help your nutrition, your comfort level, and granted this is not FDA approved or anything, but we're not talking about taking a cure, we're just talking about supplementing the immune system.
Following that class, we set up a calendar in my kitchen, and my girlfriends would sign up for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and overnight. Because I was single at the time, I really needed 24-hour coverage. And 8 of my friends, including my sister, covered me for 18 months, 24 hours a day.
We just lived the whole macrobiotic lifestyle, and it almost seemed like she responded instantly. And by that, I don't mean some kind of grandiose response. What I mean is, like, every now and then, she actually took a deep breath.
We tried to believe we knew what we were doing, but we were all frightened. We weren't familiar with the vegetables, so we would all gather in the kitchen and look through the refrigerator and wonder what was the collard greens and what was the kale and what was the kohlrabi and what was each vegetable that was new to us in our process. And we would wonder and share, and she would listen to us in the kitchen whispering about maybe it's this, maybe it's that. We would refer to the books, and we would fortunately make the correct choices.
She had quite a loving network of people.
It's amazing that my friends would give up that much of their life for me. I always knew how much I loved my friends. I just didn't know how much they loved me.
The idea behind macrobiotics is to eat clean, healthy foods, which in turn fortify the body with the nutrition it needs, while flushing out toxins that take a toll on the immune system. This cleansing process rejuvenates the blood, so the body can aggressively and efficiently fight disease.
Seeing her start on this diet was a bit traumatic, just because I didn't expect it would work. At the time, I didn't understand all the changes that can happen in the body by altering your diet this way.
The diet seemed to benefit Janet immediately, but her cancer was so advanced that it looked as if it might be too little, too late.
My lungs filled with fluid, and I would go into the hospital, and they would do what's called a thoracentesis. And they would drain like 1 or 2 liters of fluid off my lungs. Following that, they would do a chest x-ray to see if I had pneumothorax, which is a collapsing of the lung. But fortunately, I did not, but we would see that the tumors were growing.
Janet started to cry, and she said that she wanted to die, that it was too much.
And she just, on her knees next to me, please don't die. And so I thought, all right, I'll try it one more day. And then the next day would come, and it wouldn't be as bad as that day, or at least not start out as bad. So it really was a one-day-at-a-time journey, but I knew it was up to me. I could let go, and it could be over.
And each day she kept getting better. And then she got into it with gusto. She made the commitment.
Despite the setback, Janet was encouraged to continue on with her fight.
After 5 months, we saw that the tumors started to shrink.
The radiologist would call me and say, the lung looks better.
And the radiologist would say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. This is working.
Janet persevered with her strict macrobiotic diet. Frequent CT scans showed her tumors were shrinking, until one day the tumors had completely disappeared.
When I heard that my tumors were gone, of course I was elated. It was almost unbelievable, almost as unbelievable as when I heard they were first there, given such a poor prognosis. And now here it is, a year later, and now I'm tumor-free. It was really almost hard to take in.
When she first told me that she had seen the doctor and he had told her that the tumors were now gone, I was absolutely shocked.
There was no trace of cancer left in her body. That was, of course, very heartening to hear that.
She's so healthy and vibrant now, you would never have even thought she was ill, let alone so ill that they were giving her weeks to live.
Life had turned from being a nurse and a mom to being a survivor. Everything was all consumed about getting better. And now what was I going to do? Now I was better. I was weak. I mean, I certainly couldn't work, but what was I going to do with my life? I had never anticipated maybe surviving.
Janet embarked on a 4-year intensive study of macrobiotics. The knowledge she gained, she now shares with others.
She has influenced hundreds and hundreds of people. She has shown people what a macrobiotic lifestyle looks like.
I never use the term cured. I never say that I am cured because it means I don't need to try anymore, that I can just go back to the old lifestyle. I use the word healed because to me healed is an ongoing process.
A few years later, Janet met Gary Sommer through their local church, and they decided to get married.
I admired Janet from the first time I met her, and many things about her. Her love of life. I wish I could love life as much as Janet.
Gary and I went on a macrobiotic cruise to get married because it was someplace we could go and not worry about food. It was fun to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, macrobiotic, not to have to shop and cook and prepare and do the dishes. It was just a joy. And we will be going again this year. As it turns out, it's always over our anniversary, so we get to renew our vows on this ship, which is just so much fun. It's like doing it all over again.
Cancer is not a disease that frequently offers second chances. That's especially true in a case like Janet's, when it's discovered at such an advanced stage. Her cancer was so pervasive that doctors didn't even think it wise for her to continue chemotherapy. It's fitting, then, that Janet Sommer, a nurse who had devoted her life to caring for others, received that same kind of care from the family and friends who loved and nourished her back to health.